So Dani Shapiro and I met many years ago. We were trying to figure that out. But professionally, let me tell you about Dani. She is a best-selling novelist and memoirist. She writes incredible memoirs, okay? And the host of the podcast, the hit podcast, Family Secrets, now in its 7th season. Her work has been featured in the New York Times, the New Yorker, Vogue, and Time, among other publications. She's taught at Columbia and New York University and is the co-founder of Sirenland Writers Conference and her new novel, y'all bought, which is Signal Fires. So I want to invite her up here because I've been trying not to talk to her today because I wanted to save all these nuggets for you. So come on up. So Inheritance, you have written so many wonderful books that what I was telling somebody before, there's always authors that you can, as soon as you pick up the rhythm of the words, the storyline, you either feel connected or not. I felt from the moment that I read your first book, that I read, which was Slow Motion, I was in it. I felt like I was in the snowstorm. I was in there in the book with you. And there's really not a lot of authors, really. I mean, you're the person that just takes me with you along with the ride. So I want to thank you for that. And as I'm reading you, I'm just blown away at how you put the words together. I feel very less than. I mean, but also in awe of, because I'm like, how did she put that together? And then I go back to the story. But anyway, so Inheritance was the first book that really raised the very big family secret, which was a huge secret for you. And
yes.
So, and just briefly summarize that for those that did not read that book.
How much time do you have? So I have been writing about family secrets all my life as a writer, from my first book on the corrosive power of family secrets in families, and I never knew why. And as a writer, theme is just a fancy literary term for what obsesses us. And we don't choose what obsesses us. So we really don't choose our themes. And I knew that this was my theme, but I didn't know why. And I didn't feel like I even needed to. And then in 2016, my husband was doing a random recreational DNA test. And he asked me if I wanted to do one too. These testing companies right before the holidays lower their prices.
Because you need more dysfunctional family.
Well, and it becomes this huge, a holiday gift. Stocking stuffers.
Oh, God.
I could tell you stories, but
surprise.
I almost didn't do it because I knew everything about my parents and where I came from. I grew up in an Orthodox Jewish family, especially on my father's side. It was a storied family that, I had heard all the stories and was the youngest grandchild and very much felt that this was my heritage. And when my DNA test came back, it made no sense, and it turned out that I was, long story short, I'm not my father's biological child. And I'd never entertained that as a conscious idea, even though I think I had constantly been writing about it in some way. All my life that was the elephant in the room in some way, but it was an elephant I couldn't see.
And didn't people come up to you all the time and say, are you a shiksa? How could you be Jewish? Because
they did.
Yeah.
They did, and it's such a complicated thing now. I remember moving my son into his very liberal arts, super intense East Coast college, and there was on the bulletin board outside his room, there were all these things that you're not supposed to say to people. And one of them was, where are you from? And I thought, I've been getting that all my life, mostly from other Jews, honestly, who were like, "You're not. There's no way you're Jewish. You're not Jewish. I mean, like, come on, like that's not true." Or, I mean, I once counted the number of times that was said in one day,
Right.
but it never registered for me that maybe there was a reason for that. I just thought it was some sort of genetic fluke,
Right.
and it could have been, but it wasn't.
No.
Yeah.
So I knew, and it was a family secret because obviously your mother and father knew, and
So I should briefly say something about that. So
Yeah.
it wasn't that my mother had an affair. It turned out that my parents had trouble conceiving, and this is the early 1960s, and they had gone to an institute in Philadelphia and used a sperm donor. But both my parents were dead at the time that I made this discovery. So everything that I've learned since then. I went into this deep reporter mode. I knew how to do that. It's what I do for a living. My husband knows how to do that. He was a foreign correspondent for many years, and we just went into research mode and found out that, I mean, here's the thing, is that after a lifetime of writing about family secrets, what I discovered is that I was the family secret, and that both of my parents had taken a secret to the grave with them, that they fully believed, for every good reason, no one would ever know. Because there weren't, DNA, like there was no, like the idea that you could spit into a vial and have this thing sent back to you, and then there was this thing called the internet, you could discover all these things. So yeah, that's what happened.
so now that you know, and you go to, because so much of it's when somebody says who are you, right? Who are you encompasses so many things. But then when you go to the doctor even, and you want to know about your family history. So my father, who I consider my father, is my stepfather. My biological father, I don't have anything to do with and haven't for a gazillion years, and his half of my gene pool I don't know about. So one of the things that we briefly talked about today was about family secrets in general. What really it should be called is like shame, right? It's like this shame. So I find when I go to the doctor's office, it starts again. Like it's like my paternal history, and it's like I turn inward, like as though it's I don't know, like there's something wrong with me. How could you not know who half of your family is? Like how it feels bad. So I would imagine also that now you had your family tree all set up, and then all of a sudden it's just that one side is like ripped out.
Well, so I had been confidently giving medical history, all my life. This is my mother's, this is my mother's medical history. This is my father's medical history. Here I am. The first time that I ever went to a doctor's appointment, and it went, for example, my father died when I was 23 in a car accident. So that is what I've been narrating for my entire adult life. It turned into father living. And father, in terms of doctors, that's all they care about. It's not, my father who raised me, who I adored, a sperm donor who I never knew, who I've only recently discovered existed. All the doctor cares about is that. And so that's come up again and again and again for me over the last 6 years since I made that discovery, because there will just be a feeling of, I went to see an eye doctor recently for the first time, and instead of telling the story, instead of getting into my biological father this, but when you get, it's like my father has an eye condition that's genetic, because he does, even though I don't consider him to be my father.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So,
and there is shame in that. To go back to what you were saying, Anne, there's a feeling of, whenever we are experiencing something that makes us feel other, or unusual or
Different.
atypical or not normal, suddenly there is this feeling of a kind of discomfort around that, or if we dig all the way into it, I think there's shame.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's just walking around feeling shame. And do you, I knew your mother. And
You did.
I did. I knew your
Yeah.
mother. And I know that you've talked about kind of the struggles with that and kind of already before you had that secret that was, that came to light, your mother obviously knew and didn't tell you. How did, you know, I read when you post about either her birthday or Mother's Day, and I feel that struggle. And was it, what happened when you found out? Because it was already a challenging relationship to begin with. And was there anger with her, anger with your dad? Because how I read it in the book was almost that you felt bad for your dad. Like that, but
I ultimately felt badly for them both. Probably this discovery gave me more compassion for my mother than I had ever been able to experience, because she was extremely difficult. And so when she was alive, we were always in this battle with each other that I never totally, I just didn't know why, like why it had to be that way. But one of the gifts of that whole discovery and of writing not the book that you all have, but Inheritance, my previous book, part of the discovery and the learning, everything that I learned, was we don't often have the opportunity to think of our parents as people, like people who existed before us, who had their own lives separate and outside of being our parents. I had to be able to do that. I didn't do it right away. What I felt immediately was betrayed. I wondered whether everyone had known but me, which wasn't the case. My parents, I don't think, really ever told a soul. I wondered if my mother had known and my father hadn't known. I wondered if they had been entirely duped by the institute where they went. I did a huge amount of research into what at the time were the ways of kind of dealing with this. And it was very complicated because, and heartbreaking, because couples would be, so male infertility was so shameful that it still is. It didn't exist. No doctors tested for it, even though it was the easiest thing to test for it. Testing women for infertility is much more invasive. All they had to do was look at sperm under a microscope. They didn't, because all the doctors were men, and male infertility was equated with a lack of virility and a lack of being a man, and that was the end of that. So these places a couple would come in and they would say, so we're going to do this procedure, we're going to do this treatment, they called it a treatment. We will go home and have sex tonight and come back able to do the treatment, and then go home and have sex again, and nobody will ever really know. They actually called it confused artificial insemination. It's like that was the name for it. And then if a woman became successfully pregnant, and this is something I only found out later and after I finished the book, at this particular institute, she was often called and said, "Congratulations, Mrs. So-and-so, this is wonderful news, you're pregnant." But it's so amazing, the blood tests show, the levels show, you must have already been pregnant when you got here. Yeah. So, depending on your appetite for denial, depending on where you were on that spectrum, you could absolutely decide.
Just go right in.
Yeah, and so here's what I believe. I'll never know, but I've also spoken to thousands of people at this point. I've spoken to a lot of people whose mothers were still alive when they made this discovery, and there were mothers where, like, people would go to the mothers, and the mother would be like, that did not happen. That did not happen. Yes, we went to the doctor, but that didn't happen. truly had separated their own, because one of the things about secrets is that it's like it's like the perfect crime. If you're keeping a secret that you truly believe can never be revealed, then you can actually do that to yourself and allow yourself to believe that that secret will never come to light.
Right.
And so my mother would have had that appetite for denial. My father would not have had that appetite for denial. I think that they both knew that I wasn't their biological child, but I think my mother, in her mind, turned it into that I was, to the point where when my son was born, in the same hospital as where I was born, and she came in hours after he was born, Mount Sinai, she looked at my, teeny newborn and said, "He looks just like a Shapiro." And I don't think she was being dishonest. I think she needed to believe that. Whereas I think my father, who was much more of a realist, heard the comments all my life. They knew what they knew what they were doing when they went there. But it's created so much. I mean, not just for me, and in a way, this has been a huge gift for me, which we can talk about, like learning all this. But the thousands of people that I've talked to, and the bioethics programs that I've spoken in, and these stories are so they rock so many people's worlds, because there isn't a sense of like, it's about the secret. It's not about the fact of what happened.
Right.
It's about the fact that it was kept a secret.
Right. And so, and we were talking today again about imposter syndrome, because it's all about kind of the facade. So there's ways in which that we feel less than, but it's also what we present ourselves as, right? So that you don't want to, like, what is, like, the fear of someone knowing, like it does so much more damage to not tell. I mean, how many of us have tried to keep a secret, and that secret ends up being far more damaging because we just didn't come clean, or and so something like this obviously explodes. And talking about exploding in a good way, obviously that book was incredibly. I mean, your career has just gone just up like this. So out of that book, obviously it hit a nerve, but then also the podcast. So you're hearing not just family secrets, because I don't think it's just family secrets. It's not that, like, it's not, he's not my biological father, but I think it's the things that we feel that if we expose, if we tell people, like, that everything's not perfect, that you won't be loved, that you're not going to be accepted, that you're going to be different, right? And we're all different. It's like, we're all different, but we're also really very much the same, right?
So a few years ago, I was teaching a large workshop at a place called Kripalu, some of you may know, in the Berkshires. And I had a couple hundred people in the room. And it was a weekend-long retreat. It was Sunday morning, kind of near the end of it. And I was sitting up on a stage, so it was slightly higher, and I could see everybody. And I wasn't planning on doing this, but I suddenly had this thought of a writing prompt I wanted to give everyone. And I said, okay, you all will have 3 minutes. No one will see what you've written. I want you can burn it afterwards, you can rip it up, you can crumple it up, you can keep it, you can do whatever you want. It's private. I want you to write the thing that if anyone knew about you, you would die of mortification. You have 3 minutes, go. And the amazing thing about that, from where I was sitting, was no one hesitated. No one was going like, shame, mortification, what would that be? Everyone started writing. And it was like this kind of sacred 3 minutes. And when I was driving home afterwards, I was thinking about having done that because I surprised myself. And what I thought the lesson was, all right, that within that there may be a kernel of something you might want to write. You might want to think about this thing that was so dangerous for you to express. And then I thought, I would never ever do this, but what if I had said, just kidding, you all have to read them aloud now.
There are frame them actually.
There are stitch them.
Put them on social media.
But you know, I thought, what would have happened if that had happened in some sort of parallel universe? And what would have happened is that everyone would have been crying, and everyone would have been nodding, and everyone would have been saying, really, that's all? Or me too, or oh, you poor, you know, like just, it would have been an empathy bath. You know, just a feeling of profound, like we all carry things that we think no one can know.
Right.
And so with my podcast, with Family Secrets, which I started right when I finished writing the manuscript for Inheritance, and before it came out, it's too long a story to tell you, but in a very organic way, I had never thought about having a podcast, starting a podcast. It wasn't on my bucket list. I started this podcast, and I started interviewing, like really deep dive interviewing people who either had kept a secret, had a secret kept from them, or were keeping a secret from themselves in some way. And it was like this incredibly profound thing because all of them shared, like I kept on thinking, what do all these stories have in common? Because they were all totally different. Every once in a while there would be a DNA discovery story, but it was, they were all about family in some way, but it could be about an eating disorder, it could be about an addiction, it could be about having given up put up a child for adoption. Right. It could be, you know, just discovering that, you know, a father had a prior family. I mean, or a grandfather did, or, you know, there were just so many. And what I have learned over the course of 7 seasons of doing this thing now is that there are ways in which that kind of secret keeping wedges itself into the fabric of our lives. Just because a secret is like, you know, what the doctors, I'm sure, said to my parents, what that baby knows won't hurt her. You know, it's better for no one to ever know anything again. What we don't know absolutely can and does hurt us. It's lurking, it's invisible, it's shoved under the rug, but it's there. And I heard someone recently say, when you bury a secret, you bury it alive. And I think that's probably my favorite quote about secrets. And Carl Jung describes secrets as psychic poison, but it's always there. And what it does is it actually keeps us away from each other instead of allowing us to connect.
Is that also part of shame, imperfection, humanness, that we're all, you know, we've all screwed up in some very big ways, or have things about our family that we don't want to share because somehow that's a reflection, or, you know, whatever that is.
It can be in the name of love. It can be in the name of self-protection. It can be, you know, a million different things. And I'm not remotely advocating everybody goes out and goes like, you know, you know. Right. But there really, I think there is a place and a time for these, and also in the fullness of time, things that seemed like such a big deal.
Right.
Start feeling like, oh, really? Like that's the thing that was so terrifying? That's the thing that you felt that if you said you would be shunned or people wouldn't understand? And in the fullness of time, I don't think there's anything that feels that way.
Right. You also wrote a book about your marriage and the kind of the longevity of your marriage. And, you know, there's always that catch-22, and, you know, obviously you've done a lot of research, and I'm not speaking to your marriage, but like secrets within a marriage, you know, like if there's been an infidelity or there's something that you feel, there's financial, I'm a real estate broker, and I can't tell you, and I say this to women because I see it with women a lot, that things that they think financially are being taken care of are not. Life insurance that's being paid for that's not, and somebody dies and it's not their tax returns that they're signing, but they're never being sent off. And then I get called in because the apartment needs to be sold because they're in foreclosure. Mm-hmm. So talking about, because that was basically the theme of that, secrets with marriages, like, or long-time relationships. Is it the ultimate in being close to somebody when you're able to really say it like it is and be completely honest? Or in retrospect, do you think that there's times that you have to keep those secrets, that you have to keep quiet, that you have to not divulge something because it cracks you in half and you can't get back?
I think it all depends, and I know that sounds like a wishy-washy answer, but I think that when it comes to secrets, when something is revealed is as important as what it is that is revealed. I mean, if you think about something like, let's just say in a marriage, some kind of financial, like something that...
A screw up.
A screw up, right. If it's revealed within the context of a healthy and committed marriage, then it can be worked on and dealt with. If it happens because
Someone's
someone
tapping
has
on
just
your door.
died,
Right.
and you're discovering it in that way, that's a completely different story. If it could have been resolved or been thought through any number of years earlier, if somebody had been able to say to their partner, I gotta tell you this, and this is going to be a very, very hard conversation, but we need to have it, then you wouldn't be there in that moment where the apartment needed to be sold in that way.
Right.
But we're so afraid to do that, and we're not thinking. I don't think in the larger context of. I mean, I think the book that I wrote about my marriage is called Hourglass. I wanted to write a book about time and memory and commitment. There's a beautiful phrase of the poet Wendell Berry that I had come across, which he wrote about the problems of duration. That was the way that he put it, and I loved that. I thought, I want to write about the problems of duration. I want to write about the beauty of duration. I want to write about what it means to walk alongside someone over the long haul, really in it with them. And so I asked my husband if it was okay, because I intended to stay in my marriage.
And you had been married young a couple of times.
I was
right?
married twice.
Yeah, and young though. I mean,
very
it was
young,
like
19.
what was to think that the third time was actually a charm.
Yeah.
Which is right.
Yeah, right. Well, I got married as a teenager. I married again at 28, and each time was less than a year, and both were for reasons that had nothing to do with thinking this is somebody I could spend my life with. And I told one of you tonight as we were sitting and talking that I've been married twice before. That's something I never would have told anyone when I was 30 years old and I had been divorced twice, because it was like, what's wrong with you? I mean, that was my shame. My shame was, how could I possibly be divorced twice and I'm not even 30, right? And so at 35, when I married my husband, and we've been married for 26 years, now I can actually go, I did that. And it feels completely different to me than the way that it did when I was, 29 years old, and I had to. When I met my husband, when we were dating, I told him about one of the marriages, but I had to be in a car with him. We were in East Hampton. We took a really long walk. I mean, I got to go somewhere where he was going to be mine for hours.
He couldn't run.
He could not run. To break the news to him that it was not once, it was twice, in fact, and because he had not been married and he was 40, which is its own story.
Which is his own
Right.
story, right? Foreign correspondent,
Right.
40 years
Yeah,
old.
no,
right.
definitely.
There was not a good chance that was going to work out. Right?
Not so good.
But here you are.
Yeah, I remember my mother-in-law when we met. She looked at me like you really? Like, yeah, but it did.
She did the jackpot.
It did that. But these are like when we tell each other things. So in Hourglass, there's a moment. It's probably the thorniest moment in the book where. And it's the moment that we go into couples therapy about, where I realize he has stopped paying our health insurance. Because, it's a long story, but there's a reason, and he hadn't told me. And I went completely insane.
And you had a child with some very serious medical issues that came out of the, right.
Yes,
right.
but those had been resolved.
Right, no, I know, but.
But I remember, in the weeks between my finding that out and our getting the health insurance, my son was maybe, 7 or something like that, and he wanted to go ride his bike. I was like, you can't ride your bike! You cannot ride your bike! He now knows why I said that, because we don't have a lot of secrets between us. And it was also in the Annie Gets It Done department, it was okay, now Dani's going to get it done.
Dani is going to get it done.
Apparently Dani has to get it done, so Dani's going to get it done. But that, being able to write that and tell the truth of that moment within the context of, again, the larger, the larger swath of time was very liberating. To be able to do that and say, yeah, that was a big screw up, and we had to get through that. Right. But to me, in my work, in my life, but in my work, my honesty and my sort of my authenticity, or it's an overused word, but to me that's my superpower, because I can get up here and talk to you, and I can be in front of all of you, most of whom I don't know, and say these things, and I feel really comfortable doing that because I'm at home in this world that I've created and I've inhabited, and in which there really aren't secrets. And yet the irony is that I knew that I knew all that, and I would have said all that about myself 6 years ago, and yet there was this huge secret that I hadn't known. Right. And then that was like pouring rocket fuel on the rest of it.
How has, do you feel that getting older frees you? Do you feel more free? Do you feel more, less judgmental about yourself, or?
Both. I think it's so. I'm going to Miami tomorrow, and while I'm there, one of the things I'm doing is I'm interviewing Paulina Poroskova, who has a book that just came out, and it's really good. It's called Unfiltered. It just came out. It's really good. And she writes about being this gorgeous supermodel and married to Rick Ocasek, and
the it couple.
Everything about that being the it couple. And she tells a story of, everything that happened in their lives, and his sudden death, and his having written her out of his will, and she goes on Instagram at some point, and she starts to realize that Instagram is a place where she can actually really tell her unfiltered story, which is ironic, given Instagram. And she's in a restaurant one night, and she's gone to the ladies' room, and a young woman sitting at the bar stops her and says, and she's thinking, well, you're not going to know who I am. You're 22, and I was a supermodel a million years ago. And this young woman says to her, you're that lady who cries on Instagram all the time. Because she does. She cries on Instagram because she found this place where she could take this this complex life that she's lived and be like, this is what it looks like. Here are my wrinkles. This is who I am. And to me, that's the way forward.
Way forward with what?
With aging. not with, I mean, I'll tell you one other quick story. So one of my dearest friends is this Buddhist mindfulness teacher and writer in her 80s. Her name is Sylvia Boorstein. Some of you may have heard of her. She's brilliant, and she's never touched her face, you know, and she's this teeny little, like, wizened, gorgeous 88-year-old. I just saw her. I mean, she's beautiful. And I did an event with her in Beverly Hills, maybe, I don't know, a decade ago. And I was looking at Sylvia, and over here there was a woman who was also very beautiful, and also the, you know, same age as Sylvia, but had you know, done everything. And I just kept on going, just who do I, which of these, like which path? And I still don't know.
Okay.
But that feeling of whatever it is, own it. You know,
Right.
that
No,
feeling
exactly.
of like whatever it is, like there's no, I don't have a feeling one way or another of this is the path or this isn't the path. It's more of, it's such a privilege. I mean, I lost a close friend last
Such a
year.
privilege to be alive.
It's
you mean.
such a, yeah, or one of my best
Or healthy.
friends, when she was turning 60, which is the age that I just turned, she said, and now I have to turn 60. And I said,
You've
to
got
her,
a choice.
well, you don't have to.
Right,
You know,
exactly,
like,
exactly.
and
Every day above ground is a good day.
yeah. but that feeling too of how to be, I mean, I feel so very, very grateful right now that in my career, I don't feel like I'm being sidelined.
Mhm.
That and you know, Joan Didion died a year ago. The auction, I don't know if any of you know this, but okay, the auction of her belongings was just took place in a auction house in Hudson, New York. She became such an icon. Her Celine sunglasses went for $27,000.
Oh, come on.
No, it's
Oh, wow.
insane and stupid and absurd. But plastic sunglasses, Celine, $27,000. That's the only number that I know of all the. But like, she lived her whole life in this place of, I am who I am, and to me, that's what that is. It's the no apology, which, you know, somebody on my book tour fairly recently, I was in conversation with a probably 40-something author, a guy, who, and just in the middle of our conversation in front of a big crowd, said, "How old are you?" I know. And I just was like, I'm 60. And I don't think I've actually said that in a big group of people. I've talked about having a big birthday. I was in Italy. We just celebrated my big birthday.
Big birthday.
Any big birthday.
I just had a big birthday too.
Big
It was a
birthday.
big birthday.
Yes.
But it's interesting because 60, my dad was a pilot with American Airlines, and it was mandatory retirement at 60.
Wow.
60 was different too.
Very different.
And so
Yeah.
60 was tough for me.
Yes.
There was a
It was the first tough birthday for me.
and the AARP
Oh, yeah.
catalogs, the Comfy Shoe
like-
catalogs. I mean, it's just
And you get these Instagram ads for
I mean,
all sorts of
all
you know.
the time, all the time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
depends or next, but no, there's also this incredible wealth. This is why we're here, of wisdom, and it's like I don't. When you say you don't care as much, it's like it's with no. You're not making excuses. You're just saying I am who I am. But there is also self-reflection. It's not this is who I am. Take it or leave it.
Oh no.
But I feel that the more that I can, the more experiences that I have. But I feel like my heart is more open. I don't know why that would be, and maybe it's because, you know, my kids are gone, and so there's not that intense kind of, like, there's a different chapter that you get to too,
Yes.
like but I also feel like there's so many of you that wrote about, I just want to know what I want to do when I grow up, and I love the fact that there are grandmothers saying, I want to know what I want to do when I grow up, because I think it's all about evolving and learning and those next chapters. And speaking about next chapters, we're talking about next book. So I just, because I want to open this up for questions, but just tell us a little bit about what we're going to read, because we all have signed copies of Dani's book outside that you all read. And I got halfway through it and I was like, I'm going to blow this. I'm going to say something about what happens. So I didn't want to finish it. But anyway, so tell us a little bit about how this came about. And it's doing, like it's already been named. You toot your own horn. Go, tell me. No, please do. Please do. Tell us.
I mean, it's getting a lot of really nice accolades.
Not just a lot of, please be specific. She's rocking it. Let's go.
Time magazine just chose it as one of the best books of the year. The Washington Post.
Okay, hold on. Let her finish. And Washington Post.
Whatever it is.
And what else? Keep going.
And Amazon.
And Amazon.
Yeah.
Best book of the year.
And Real Simple and a bunch of other books. But, thank you. But, thank you. I couldn't have written this novel any sooner than I did. I started it 15 years ago, and I have these characters. I think of them as a constellation of characters. They range from a young boy to an older physician to a chef to a Hollywood producer to a woman with Alzheimer's. I don't want to spoil anything for you by really describing too much about it, but I put the book in a drawer 15 years ago because even though I'd written 100 pages of it, I had not lived enough life. I didn't know that. I just thought, well, I wrote myself into a corner and I can't write this book. It wasn't until probably about 8 months into the pandemic that I was cleaning up my office closet and I found it again. I wasn't thinking about it. I wasn't thinking, oh, I have a book in a drawer, I can go back to that. Nothing like that. And I reread it, and a couple of things happened. One was, part of Signal Fires takes place on one night in 2010, and part of it takes place on one night on New Year's Eve of 1999. Remember Y2K New Year's Eve? We all thought the world was going to end. I mean, how cute was that?
Like, don't get in a plane. Do not get in a plane.
Right. Right. And the thing that broke it open for me again is I thought, and now it's 2020. And I actually had written these two parts of the book that each took place 10 years apart with these characters who I loved. And I thought, who would they be now? And so there's this very thin kind of layer of 2020 that's in the book that's more like almost like a window shade gets lifted and you get to see, like, don't we all want a crystal ball just for a couple of minutes? If we could just see that the 11-year-old boy turns out to be, he's okay at 21, or, but it's a book about interconnectedness, and it's a book about interdependence. And I couldn't have written it if I hadn't made the discovery about my father. The ways in which sometimes we meet someone and they feel really familiar to us and we don't know why. We feel like, I just know you, or I want you in my life. That chemistry, we call it chemistry. What is that? Like, sometimes someone who has profound significance to us can just brush by us on the street or in an airport, or we can be sitting next to them on a plane and we won't know it. And I've always been really interested in that. And so that really plays into the book. And so does my long marriage. So does my husband was sick a couple of years ago and he recovered. It was a very serious cancer. And all of that plays into this story. And then the pandemic, ultimately, and the realization I think that so many of us have had that we're in this thing, this life thing, this earth thing, this global thing. We're in it together. And so that all came back to me and enabled me to write this book and to finish it and bring it out into the world.
Can't wait. Yay. Do we have any questions?
Dani, hi. and you know it early on that your father was not your biological father?
My answer to that has changed over the last 6 years. I think for me, at that time, when no one who had children that way ever told their children, no one. There's not, I really don't think there's a single person out there among the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who were conceived using donor sperm who were told, of my generation, no one. So if my parents had told me when I was already feeling like a unicorn and already feeling like the little blonde girl who, everybody in the neighborhood was patting on my head and saying, literally saying, you could have gotten us bread from the Nazis in the ghetto, literally saying that to me, and who was an only child with older parents, and I don't think I would have survived it, because I wouldn't have had anyone to go to, anyone to talk to.
You couldn't have talked to anybody, right?
Anyone who would have said, yeah, me too.
You would have had the weight of the secret.
I would have had the weight of everything, and the possibility that I ever might find out who I did come from biologically would have been a completely, not just closed door, it would have been like a fortress. That's not true anymore, and I just feel like I want to say that because there still are people who don't tell their kids the truth about these matters, and now there's no reason not to. Now there are huge numbers of young people out there who are discovering their half siblings and have their private Facebook groups, and there are meetups, and that was very much led by the same-sex family community. So lesbians who had a baby, men who had a baby using an egg donor, they were the vanguard, like the forefront of telling the truth about these things to their families, because there had to be somebody else.
Right.
So it eliminated the possibility that you could just and those are in my experience anecdotally. I'm not a researcher, but I probably have encountered more people anecdotally than maybe anybody, because of my book tour and because of Inheritance, the healthiest families, because there weren't these secrets. There was this sense of, here's how we made a family. Isn't this awesome? And here's here's how we did it. Here's this person. And that is happening more and more and more. One of the things for me that was so extraordinary about Inheritance coming out and writing that story is that my story intersected with an important story. This was an important story, and I ended up being the one who could tell it, because I had written 10 books, because I had the skills, because I had been delving into family and identity all my life without knowing why. And so when that happened, all of these families who had kept these secrets have started to tell the truth to their offspring, if they hadn't already, because they realized that they were going to find out.
Right.
Of course, as you say, it was a different time, and maybe your parents knew exactly what you're just saying, that you wouldn't have had the support.
Right.
And maybe they talked about, what?
I don't think they ever talked about it ever again.
No, never again. No.
I've thought a lot about this,
do you
and
have a question?
I'll never know.
Deborah.
I have 2 questions. Hi.
Hi.
So you mentioned that you think you've been writing this your whole life. So do you think that inside of you somewhere you just felt like, do you think you were doing that all along and trying to figure that out because of something you were getting? Because, you know what I mean?
I do.
Like it's really,
I do.
That's my first question.
Yeah.
And my second question is, do you know for a fact that your parents were not one of the ones told, oh, you must have been pregnant before you got here?
No, I don't know that, and I think they very likely might have been told that, and yet I did manage to interview or meet a woman in her 80s who had conceived of her child in the same institute as my parents, and at the same time, and within months. And so it was the closest to being in the room where it happened. I wanted to know as close to the truth as I could ever get. I remember a rabbi I went to see because I thought he might have known something, saying to me, "What story would ease your heart?" And I said,
Right.
"The true one." Yeah. And so I was intent on learning as much of the truth as I could while holding the awareness that I would never really know. But in that story, that woman said to me, "Oh, your parents would have known why they were going there." You know, and you would sit across the desk from the doctor and talk about blood type, which was the one thing they knew. You know, they knew that like that could be a tell.
That could be a tell. Got it. Right.
And talk about preferences and talk about physical resentment. You know, so I think that they knew. But to go back to your first question, I have found that really interesting because we find things out along the way in life, and then we often supply narratives in retrospect, like, well, it must have been this way, it must have been that way. The difference with me is that I have an entire shelf full of books that I've written. My first book came out in 1990, and when I go back and I have had like reason to reread what I wrote, on some profound level I knew. And it's there in black and white. I'm not looking for it, it's there. And I had to, during the pandemic, I actually recorded 2 audiobooks. My first memoir, Slow Motion, is now an audiobook. And then this book about writing that I wrote in 2013 called Still Writing. They both became audiobooks. And I was in a booth by myself with a director in my headphones, recording these books and that I wrote both
Years
before I knew this. And I had to stop a couple of times because it was so stunning to me that I knew. And then the last thing that I would say about that in terms of signal fires, the book that you all have tonight, is that I started that book in 2010-ish. I made the discovery about my father in 2016. I created out of thin air this character in 2010 who was a doctor, who was a pulmonary specialist, surgeon, who looks a certain way, has certain physical characteristics, and has kind of a certain kind of nature, just the way that he moves through the world. He is my biological father. And it's as if I like wrote a letter to my future self in novel form. And I will forever be dumbfounded and humbled by the mystery of that, because even when I went back to the book, I never once thought, oh, that's the case. It wasn't until I finished the novel and I gave it to my son, who's met his biological grandfather, and he read it and he said, he came into my office and he's like, Mom, he's just like him.
Oh my God, right.
And
Whoa.
as soon as he said it, I thought, holy
Shit.
shit. Yeah, like, yeah, he is. Yeah. How did that happen? But it did.
That's amazing.
And anyone who's read Inheritance, who would then read Signal Fires, would think that I must have created that character after.
Right.
But I
Right.
didn't.
One more question, sorry. And then we'll break, and then if you want to run up to Dani, but who's has to fly out tomorrow. Make them super quick. Amy, go ahead.
I just have a question. What's your favorite book that you've written?
Oh, that's like asking about like
Children.
If you have 11 children.
My mom said everyone really does have a
Yeah.
Of course I know.
I actually feel like my newest book is my favorite. I feel like everything that I am and everything that I know and the compassion, to go back to what we were talking about aging, the compassion, there are, a couple of characters in Signal Fires who really just can't get out of their own way. And I felt like, I felt like I was the mother of them all. Like I felt such love for all of these characters, even the ones that are gnarly. And I think that it's a very hopeful, there's a lot of joy and a lot of hope in this novel, even though it's about some hard things. And it's so interesting, a close friend of mine who interviewed me a week ago, another writer, said to me, like in a conversation like this, she said, it's your first book where your mother really isn't in it. And I thought, that is absolutely true. My mother is not in this book. I'm resolved.
Right.
Like there's a kind of closure. I mean, every once in a while there's some kind of crazy dream, but there's a kind of closure, and I don't need to work that out anymore. And I was working all that out in my life as a writer. And so now there's this liberation. I can just write about whatever I want.
Cool.
Yeah.
I forget exactly the wording of it, but you were talking about how a parent was speaking to the child, I think it was to Waldo, and the words were attacking.
Oh, yeah.
You talked about what the meaning was behind it.
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
I want for you to
yeah.
be okay.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
And
No,
you just,
yeah.
you put it so beautifully, and it was just what we all do, which is we say something that sounds terrible to our kids, but the feeling behind it is, I just love you so much, you know?
Well, that was the empathy, and I couldn't have
Right.
known that. So this is a character who, he's kind of always in a rage toward his son because
Right.
he doesn't understand his son, and all he wants is for him to live a
Be the same
normal life,
right,
because
for
he
him
thinks
to be.
that is going to be his best path forward. And so it all comes out wrong.
Right.
But he knows it. He knows that it's coming out wrong, and that's just like torture for him.
I have a friend who's a grandmother to a child that is gay, and he's 7 or 8 years old in the Bahamas, and it is just brutal down there. It's illegal to be gay. And she said, I don't want this. I don't want this for him.
Yeah.
And she's like, I love him. Like, she loves him. She appreciates him. He eats him up. But it's the protective. Like,
Yes.
I want him to not be different.
Yes.
I want his life to be easy.
Yeah.
And so you just put that so beautifully in the way that you always do.
Well, if you go all the way back to the beginning of our conversation and you talking about shame, where does that come from? It comes from the fear that we're different, right? Or it's like difference equals not okay,
Right.
equals.
Right.
So we've just come completely full circle.
Right. And when you get a little older, you realize when you are different, you're going to embrace it, and it feels very, very
Right,
you
and
know,
who
it just feels free.
And who wants to peak at the age of 11?
Exactly. Those
mean,
glory days.
Who here peaked in middle school? Show up. Right. Thank God.
So, anyway, I want to thank you so much because I know you're on
it's
this
a joy.
major book tour.